A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, Chapter 18, in the Queen's Dungeon. Well, I arranged all that, and I had the man sent to his home. I had a great desire to rack the executioner, not because he was a good, painstaking, and pain-giving official, for surely it was not to his discredit that he performed his functions well, but to buy him back for wantonly cuffing and otherwise distressing that young woman. The priests told me about this, and were generously hot to have him punished. Something of this disagreeable sort was turning up every now and then. I mean episodes that showed that not all priests were frauds and self-seekers, but that many, even the great majority of these, that were down on the general among the common people, were sincere and right-hearted, and devoted to the alleviation of human troubles and suffering. Well, it was a thing which could not be helped, so I seldom fretted about it, and never many minutes at a time. It has never been my way to bother much about things which you can't cure, but I did not like it, for it was just the sort of thing to keep people reconciled to the established church. We must have a religion, it goes without saying, but my idea is to have it cut up into 43 sects, so that they will police each other, as had been the case in the United States in my time. Concentration of power in a political machine is bad, and an established church is only a political machine. It was invented for that. It is nursed, cradled, preserved for that. It is an enemy to human liberty, and does no good which it could not better do in a split-up and scattered condition. That wasn't law, it wasn't gospel. It was only an opinion, my opinion, and I was only a man, one man, so it wasn't worth any more than the Pope's, or any less for that matter. Well, I couldn't rack the executioner, neither would I overlook the just complaint of the priests. The man must be punished somehow or other, so I degraded him from his office and made him leader of the band. The new one that was to be started. He begged hard and said he couldn't pay, a plausible excuse, but too thin. There wasn't a musician in the country that could. The Queen was a good deal outraged next morning when she found she was going to have neither Hugo's life nor his property, but I told her she must bear this cross, that while by law and custom she certainly was entitled to both the man's life and his property, there were extenuating circumstances, and so, in Arthur the King's name, I had pardoned him. The deer was ravaging the man's fields, and he had killed it in sudden passion, and not for gain, and he had carried it into the royal forest in hope that that might make detection of the misdoer impossible. Confound her, I couldn't make her see that sudden passion is an extenuating circumstance in the killing of venison, or of a person, so I gave up and let her sulk it out. I did think I was going to make her see by remarking that her own sudden passion in the case of the page modified that crime. "Crime!" she exclaimed. "How thou talkest! Crime, forsooth! Man, I am going to pay for him." Oh, it was no use to waste sense on her. Training is everything. Training is all there is to a person. We speak of nature, it is folly. There is no such thing as nature. What we call by that misleading name is merely heredity and training. We have no thoughts of our own, no opinions of our own. They are transmitted to us, trained into us, all that is original in us, and therefore fairly creditable and discreditable to us, can be covered up and hidden by the point of a cambric needle, all the rest being atoms contributed by and inherited from a procession of ancestors that stretches back 1,000,000,000 years to the Adam clan or the grasshopper or monkey from whom our race has been so tediously and ostentatiously and unprofitably developed. And as for me, all that I think about in this plodding sad pilgrimage, this pathetic drift between the eternities, is to look out and humbly live a pure and high and blameless life, and save that one microscopic atom in me that is truly me. The rest may land in Sheol, and welcome for all I care. No, confound her, her intellect was good. She had brains enough, but her training made her an ass. That is, from a many centuries later point of view, to kill a page was no crime. It was her right, and upon her right she stood, serenely and unconscious of offense. She was a result of generations of training, in unexamined and unassailed belief that the law which permitted her to kill a subject when she chose was a perfectly right and righteous one. Well, we must give even Satan his due. She deserved a compliment for one thing, and I tried to pay it, but the words stuck in my throat. She had a right to kill the boy, but she was in no wise obliged to pay for him. That was law for some other people, but not for her. She knew quite well that she was doing a large and generous thing to pay for that lad, and that I ought, in common fairness, to come out with something handsome about it. And I couldn't. My mouth refused. I couldn't help seeing, in my fancy, that poor old grandma with the broken heart, and that fair young creature lying butchered, his little silken pomps and vanities laced with his golden blood. How could she pay for him? Whom could she pay? And so, well knowing that this woman, trained as she had been, deserved praise, even adulation, I was not yet able to utter it. Trained as I had been, the best I could do was to fish up a compliment from outside, so to speak, and the pity of it was that it was true. "Madam, your people will adore you for this." Quite true, but I meant to hang her for it some day, if I lived. Some of those laws were too bad, altogether too bad. A master might kill his slave for nothing but mere spite, malice, or to pass the time, just as we have seen that the crowned head could do it with his slave. That is to say, anybody, a gentleman, could kill a free commoner, and pay for him cash or garden truck. A noble could kill a noble without expense, as far as the law was concerned, but reprisals in kind were to be expected. Anybody could kill somebody except the commoner and the slave. These had no privileges. If they killed, it was murder, and the law wouldn't stand murder. It made short work of the experimenter, and of his family, too, if he murdered somebody who belonged up among the ornamental ranks. If a commoner gave a noble even so much as a Damien's scratch, which didn't kill or even hurt him, he got Damien's dose for it just the same. They pulled him to rags and tatters with horses, and all the world came to see the show and crack jokes and have a good time, and some of the performers of the best people present were as tough and as properly unprintable as any that have been printed by the pleasant Casanova in his chapter about the dismemberment of Louis XV's poor awkward enemy. I had had enough of this grisly place by this time, and wanted to leave, but I couldn't, because I had something on my mind that my conscience kept prodding me about, and wouldn't let me forget. If I had the remarking of man, he wouldn't have any conscience. If I had the remaking of man, he wouldn't have any conscience. It is one of the most disagreeable things connected with a person, and although it certainly does a great deal of good, it cannot be said to pay in the long run. It would be much better to have less good and more comfort. Still, this is only my opinion, and I am only one man. Others, with less experience, may think differently. They have a right to their views. I only stand to this. I have noticed my conscience for many years, and know it is more trouble to bother to me than anything else I started with. I suppose that in the beginning I prized it, because we prize anything that is ours, and yet how foolish it was to think so. If we look at it another way, we see how absurd it is. If I had an anvil in me, would I prize it? Of course not. And yet you come to think there's no real difference between a conscience and an anvil. I mean for comfort. I have noticed it 1,000 times, and you could dissolve an anvil with acids when you couldn't stand it any longer, but there isn't any way you can work off a conscience, at least so it will stay worked off, not that I know of anyway. There was something I wanted to do before leaving, but it was a disagreeable matter, and I hated to go at it. Well, it bothered me all the morning. I could have mentioned it I could have mentioned it to the old king, but what would be the use? He was but an extinct volcano. He had been active in his time, but his fire was out this good while. He was only a stately ash-pile now, gentle enough and kindly enough for my purpose, without doubt, but not usable. He was nothing, this so-called king. The queen was the only power there, and she was a Vesuvius. As a favor, she might consent to warm a flock of sparrows for you, but then she might take that very opportunity to turn herself loose and bury a city. However, I reflected that as often as any other way, when you are experiencing the worst, you get something that is not so bad after all. So I braced up and placed my matter before Her Royal Highness. I said I had been having a general jail delivery at Camelot and among neighboring castles, and with her permission I would like to examine her collection, her bric-a-brac, that is to say, her prisoners. She resisted, but I was expecting that, but she finally consented. I was expecting that too, but not so soon. That about ended my discomfort. She called her guards and torches, and we went down into the dungeons. These were down under the castle's foundations, and mainly were small cells hollowed out of the living rock. Some of these cells had no light at all. In one of them was a woman in foul rags who sat on the ground and would not answer a question or speak a word, but only looked up at us once or twice through a cobweb of tangled hair, as if to see what casual thing it might be that was disturbing with sound and light the meaningless dull dream that was become her life. After that she sat bowed, with her dirt-caked fingers idly interlocked in her lap, and gave no further sign. This poor rack of bones was a woman of middle age, apparently, but only apparently. She had been there 9 years, was 18 when she entered. She was a commoner, and had been sent here on her bridal night by Sir Berus Saint-Pete, a neighboring lord whose vassal her father was, and to which said lord had refused what has since been called le droit du seigneur, and moreover had opposed violence to violence, and split half a gill of his almost sacred blood. The young husband had interfered at that point, believing the bride's life in danger, and had flung the noble out into the midst of the humble and trembling wedding guests in the parlor, and left him there astonished at this strange treatment, and implacably embittered against both bride and groom. The said lord, being cramped for dungeon room, had asked the queen to accommodate his 2 criminals, and here, in her Bastille, they had been ever since. Hither, indeed, they had come before their crime was an hour old, and had never seen each other since. Here they were, kernelled like toads in the same rock. They had passed 9 pitch-dark years within 50 feet of each other, yet neither knew whether the other was alive or not. All the first years their only question had been asked with beseeching and tears that might have moved stones. In time, perhaps, but hearts are not stones. Is he alive? Is she alive? But they had never got an answer, and at last that question was not asked any more, or any other. And there we will pause.